found AHO Radio. We're authentic human outliers coming together to help heal the fear of being authentic, to bring back genuine human conversation. No hype, no sensationalism, just honest talk about the critical issues affecting society, affecting humankind. And now, here are the hosts of AHO Radio, Millennial Adam T. Cummings with Boomers John Krotek and Bill Haratzman. So here we are. You know, it's another chance for John and for me to sit down with an amazing guest. Today's guest is Resa Kirkland, and to talk about who we are, like as people right now. This is a time where it's more important that we're authentic than that we actually do whatever we did, prior to the pandemic.
A lot of people who do know me know I write military history, and my specialty is the Korean War and communism, which has never really gone away and is probably America's greatest enemy. People know I say that. And the fact that I tend to coin phrases such as ISLAMMUNISm, which is defined as the last day's secret combination that we've seen developed in the last 35, 40 years between Islam and communism, actually. And I have a saying that communism will gladly achieve with jihad what it failed to achieve with the Cold War. I originally got my degree in education, but I absolutely refused to join the NEA. I butted heads with professors in college because they were very left-leaning, and I called them on it. I almost got in trouble doing the same thing with a high school teacher, except one of the few times my dad defended me at school was that. Because he's the one that taught me all this and taught me not to let my guard down when it came to the leftists. And he's the one that taught me about Khrushchev bragging about infiltrating the Democratic Party during World War I and taking it over back then. He bragged about this in the 1950s openly. He was so confident that they had it. And he's the one that taught me to watch for patterns. And to watch the patterns of the left, that they would be identical to communists, which they are, and that there would come a time of panic among the left where I told my son 3 months ago that impeachment failed, the Antifa violence has failed, trying to subdue us with emotionally charged words, which they've created the emotional response to, such as racism and sexism, that has failed. And I told him, the tactics of deception, which I taught my sons, are distract, divert, evade, stall, deny, lie, attack. And I said, they're up to attack. There's going to be an attack. They're going to call their commie mommies and they're going to attack. And sure enough, that I absolutely believe this is a manufactured, fake, shamdemic is what I call it. And that the communists now are in America, I call them the commie-crats, not the Democrats, that they've been exposed. And I absolutely believe from patterns of behavior, and ask anyone in law enforcement what patterns mean, that the reason they went with Biden is Biden threatened to blackmail them if they did not agree that he would be the presidential candidate. Why? Well, because if he gets into office, which they're just psychotic enough to believe he could, if he gets into office, that stops all investigations into him and probably Hunter. And I believe he threatened to expose everyone that's involved in Ukraine, not just Ukraine, but all of the communist and even Middle Eastern enemies we have, if they did not withdraw from the race and make him the candidate. And because they did not want him, that was clear. And then all of a sudden, with breakneck speed in one weekend, they switched to fully supporting him and pulling out, all of them, pulling out. And my son once asked me, then why don't they go with Sanders if their goal is communism? They don't want it to be hard and they don't want to risk their lives. They're cowardly. So what does that require? They can't come out in the open like Sanders has. Till when? Till our guns are gone, because they're cowards. Our guns have to be gone first. Then they'll come out in the open. When Durham changed everything from the original investigation, he expanded it greatly, made it criminal. That's when we saw a lot of the panic. So what did they do? They did a stall. Look what happened as a result. It shut everything down. The economy is better than it's ever been in the history of America. They had to stop that. They managed to. They've stalled so they can try to figure out what the hell they're going to do. And they are so brain damaged from decades of overwhelming emotion, which damages the brain the exact same way drugs do. And long-term emotional phagotronics with no return to logic eventually damages the brain to the point that it can no longer return to logic or reason. That's why they act the way they do. They can't return because they've raised 2 generations now in nothing but emotional hysteria. And that long of emotional chemicals released causes the same brain damage that drug abuse causes. I actually survived the German measles outbreak in the late 60s. I got roseola, which is baby measles. I received a priesthood blessing. I'm a Mormon, and I was left with absolutely no effects. They were stunned, but I wasn't. That was an epidemic. That is when they started immunizing babies as young as 6 months, because roseola hits between the ages of 6 months and 3 years. Before that, they didn't immunize that young. That's when they started.
What is it that motivates you to be this schooled up on all this information? What is it underneath there that makes it go?
What really does define me?
Yes.
Since I was very little, I cannot abide or tolerate injustice. I cannot abide or tolerate deception or law breaking.
I was just listening to a Ronald Reagan speech back in 1964.
Oh, my first, yeah.
I don't know if you've seen that speech, but it is chilling because everything he talks about in that speech is exactly what's going on
Yes,
today.
I know that speech well. I haven't downloaded.
Yeah, I just picked it up for the first time. And Ronald Reagan, who, you know, we might not have always agreed with his policies, but you cannot admit or you cannot deny that he did not love America and America's people.
Oh, the man understood. He understood the law and he understood the Constitution very well.
You know, Bill and I have had this conversation before about communism, you know, and globalism, what it all means. And my personal belief, of course, we're just here in conversation and without all the bluster and all that, I believe that globalism empowered communism.
Mm-hmm.
I personally believe that those at the top of the food chain financially became wealthier. I believe global markets exploded with consumeristic product, less quality, created a consumer, not just in America. They took away the industries of Europe. The industries of America disappeared. No longer were countries totally dependent on themselves, and we created these supply chains that we're dependent on. Now, I don't know the source of the virus other than it probably came from China.
Mm-hmm.
And if it did, whether or not something sinister or not, it certainly is a precursor to what we're seeing now. And Bill and I have had this talk. I'm 60 years old. Okay, I was born in a baby boomer, 1959. My dad served 28 years in the military. I know that I would have never had dreamed at 60 years old that I would leave my home and drive to downtown Sarasota, Florida, which is a gorgeous community, and every single business is closed on a Monday.
Yeah. It reminds me of the bread lines of the 80s and 70s in the Soviet Union.
And the question that I have, based on prior history with epidemics, bubonic plague, some of the, the malaria during the Civil War, based on all of the former microbial invasions, if you will, there was never anything ever like the global economic shutdown that we're
That's
experiencing.
right. No, not even close.
I have to wonder, first of all, everybody understands economies can't lay dormant forever. And my concern is if we default on these loans to China and we put a class of people in an enslaved state, where do we go from here? Of course, the show is about conversation, but I mean, where do we go?
What does communism state? From its inception, actually with Marxism back to Engels and Roberts, they stated that it will rule the world. That is still its goal. Specifically, the Chinese manifesto, you must understand, specifically names America as its #1 enemy. It specifically names that it will rule the world, and at any given time, 80% of Chinese missiles are pointed at American cities. You need to know that going in. You also need to know that almost every pandemic or great illness in history has come out of two places. First, China. Second, the African continent. Those are the two big areas it's come out of. You combine those two histories. You combine the fact that China has no technology of its own. I remember in the 90s, every week there was something in the paper about someone from China being caught at an American laboratory stealing our technology. Go back to the 90s, how behind us China was. That was the Clintons. The Clintons did that. Do you remember Charlie Tree? Charlie Tree, who the billionaire who was indicted for giving money to the Clinton campaign back in the 90s. He went to prison. He was convicted. Nothing happened to the Clintons. Remember what Khrushchev bragged about? Khrushchev bragged that our children would wake up communist one day because they would implement it step by step. Step by step, they would shred the Constitution, they would take away our laws, and that it had started right around the time of World War I, because that's when they gained possession of the Democratic Party. They had tried both parties, and only a fool would believe they haven't embedded people in the Republican Party as well. They have, of course they have. But Khrushchev stressed that they had complete control and overtaking of the Democratic Party and their leadership. What do we see happening with the Clintons, who stole both elections? Well, we see the Chinese ripping off America and gaining leaps and bounds ahead of themselves. And we saw the Islamic attacks. The first World Trade Center bombing, the USS Cole, the African embassy bombings, all of that happened under the Clintons. And it's not a coincidence. Bill Clinton had 13 opportunities to get bin Laden. The reason they're panicking now is they've never had to deal with a president that actually did what he said he was going to do.
How do we move forward today? See, that's the thing that matters.
But we move forward first. We have to know the history, because history tells us the future. You have to recognize the patterns to understand where we are now. That will tell you, okay, I understand how we got here. I understand the patterns that led us here. How do we stop it from continuing? You have to stop the pattern.
I can tell that you love our country and that you love what you do, but I want to know why. Like, what is it that inspires you to this very deep love that you have?
The men who shed their blood because they loved the law, they loved our land, and they loved their freedom.
You know, there's an interesting quote that Jefferson left us, that the tree of freedom needs to be nourished with the blood of the tyrants and the patriots. Every now and then, it's the natural manure. So there's no doubt.
It is. It's the pattern of history.
Bill just said it, and you've said it, and I believe it, that we have always been, with the rise of communism, we have always been in an ideological war. And I absolutely believe that communist leaders are not the friends of America.
No. Oh my gosh, not.
I have to say that on the show, and because I don't think that they love anything about America other than the fact that we can spend a lot of money on products that they make. There's no doubt in my mind that a Chinese person, who I have nothing personally against, has a lot less freedoms than we do here. And the Chinese government would cringe to think what would happen to their power base if they were to empower those people.
They rule with fear because they are afraid.
Yeah, and there's a book out there. It's called The 100-Year Marathon. It's a scholarly written book that talks about the patience that the Chinese government has been in and will continue to be in till they break down these institutions. Now, it's a well footnoted book, well researched. There's a lot of books out there like that. My thing would be this, Resa, based on conversations we're having here today, but also conversations that I've had with Bill. How do we, knowing our history and choosing a side, because sooner or later in life, you have to have a side. I mean, we would like to negotiate, but if the person you're negotiating with is not doing so in, let's say, transparency, then who do you trust? What do you think the solution is? What do you think?
Okay, you have to start by getting rid of political castration. I'd never call it correct. The scripture said in the last days, men will call evil good and good evil. That is literally what PC is. Please stop calling it correct. Call it what it is. I labeled it political castration 30 years ago because I recognized it was calling evil good, but I did it because of a quote from Khrushchev where he said that through the infiltration of the three commonalities, education, media, and Hollywood, they would control the future, the present, and they would rewrite history and render America impotent. And there I had my C word to take the place of correct. Political castration. The goal of communism is to render us impotent for takeover. Never forget the Chinese and communist goal is to rule the world. We have seen in the last 3 months several incidents all originating in communist countries. One, the Chi-Coms and coronavirus biological attack. They were called by the commie mommies. They released it. Two, we have seen Putin trying to tank the oil market in conflicts with Syria and Saudi Arabia, and we've seen the oil market crash. Three, as of yesterday, 3 missiles from North Korea. I made the bold prediction in 2002 in the first article I wrote at the request of Joseph Farah of WorldNet Daily. Most people don't know a lot about Korea. I made the bold prediction that when the history of Armageddon is written, we will find that the first salvo actually came out of a communist country, specifically North Korea, and I stand by it. We may not realize it when it's happening, but when we're writing the history of Armageddon, we will see it clearly, and it will have come out of North Korea. We've seen something else. Putin has taken over. He is centralizing power again, like Stalin and Lenin did. He's got rid of the prime minister and taken those powers to himself. What is that? Concentrating power in a small group of elites. It's bad. He's done that.
Let me ask you this, Resa. A lot of that is taking place. I've been reading outside the mass media. Let me ask you this. So one of the ways that they're going to do this, from what I've read, is through fear. And we know that fear—
That's the only way.
Yeah, fear has an amazing way, and it's very successful. It's stymieing people's actions.
Mm-hmm.
So what can we do? What do you think we can do to eliminate the fear?
We have to return to God. God never does anything with fear. That's Satan's territory and Satan's only. And if there's a group that is promulgating fear or trying to cause an overwhelming emotional response in the brain. An overwhelming emotional response in the brain temporarily disarms the logic center of the brain. And that's where truth and reason, the ability to recognize truth and the ability to reason reside. Cerebral cortex, the logic center of the brain. Now, this serves a good purpose. It's tied to the fight-flight response in humans, and it enables an animal in a moment of extreme stress, such as an attack by a much larger animal or a group. It enables an animal to take risks that it would not normally take in a state of logic, such as fighting a much larger animal than itself, or running away and leaping and doing things that would otherwise be horrendously dangerous and they would never do it. So it serves a purpose. Here's what Khrushchev and Stalin's scientists figured out, and Hitler's too. If you can keep people emotionally charged so that the brain does not return to logic, you can get them to do anything. Now, remember what I said earlier about the brain of somebody that's in a constant state of emotion that never returns to logic being identical to the brain damage caused by drug abuse? There you have it. That's why they found that if they kept people flooded with the chemicals that come from an overwhelming emotional response, such as the fear of being called racist, the fear of being called sexist. They created that for this purpose. The fear of, what do we see Nancy Pelosi doing? He's doing this. He's trying to take over. He's the totalitarian. What did Goebbels say? The minister of propaganda for the Nazis, left-wingers? Accuse your enemy of that which you yourself are guilty. It's called projecting. You accuse them of that. That's how you know they're the ones engaging in it, because they've accused you of it. So that's why it was important, as I said, to point out who's been the slave owner, who's been the racist, who did the Solid South, who fought schools desegregation. Republicans were for all those things.
All of us
Democrats were against it.
We have all fought those things. It doesn't matter what label you have. We've all fought those things. You're fighting them now. But right. I have a question for you, because you're talking about this like it's all black and white. And there is a very powerful individual in the world who is taking the middle way and who has demonstrated in his various reincarnations for thousands of years that works. What do you have to say to us about compassion?
Because compassion is the law. And if you love the law, then you have compassion. But here's the bottom line. One of the things I've loved about the Hong Kong students is a sign that they have held up, loving Donald Trump, loving the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. They've sung it, they've written it. And one of the memes I've really liked is, be the America the Hong Kong students think you are. I love that. They think we really are this. They think we're not elitists. And I warn you about choosing the middle of the road. Remember Mr. Miyagi from the Karate Kid?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What did he say? Daniel-san, walk left side of the road safe. Not really, but for sake of argument. Walk right side of the road safe. Walk middle of the road, squish, just like grape. People, those who walk the middle of the road endanger everybody. They refuse to choose a side. They endanger pedestrians on both sides of the road because cars have to swerve to miss them. They endanger the drivers on both sides of the road for the same reason. If you refuse to choose a side, you can't be counted on by anybody at any time.
You're very clearly in your lane on this, and that's fine. But I want to ask you, what happens when something comes along to challenge you at a core level?
I follow God and Christ, so I follow their example and do what they do. Christ would turn to them and say, what saith the law?
So a
And
communist
they
is
would
no, no,
repeat
no.
the law
I'll turn
to
it
him.
outside. I'll turn it to you in this way. A communist comes to your door, says, Resa, I can't get to the store right now and I need food. What do you do?
I would listen to the spirit. And if the spirit said, Resa, this person is genuine and needs help, help them immediately. I don't care about their politics. But if the spirit said, whoa, Resa, hold up. Don't trust this person. Remember, you can't hide a bad spirit from God.
No, Resa, I absolutely agree with intuition. And I think that one thing as humans that we haven't been able to, one thing that gets a lot of us in trouble is we don't go with our intuition.
We
And
don't heed discernment, the spirit.
Right. And I know that a lot of times when I don't go with my intuition, I always get burned. And so your answer is well noted, and it's a correct answer, because it could be a communist that's waiting for you to get in the car, and down the street there's 10 of them waiting to take your car. And you know, I believe that the power that the spirit, the divine consciousness, God, gives you that level of discernment.
He does.
And you have to, as an adult, which you just said, that supposedly is supposed to think with wisdom and levity at times, you're going to get that. Not always, but you're going to get that. I personally believe that labels have their place at times, but not always. And if we're trying to develop compassion, of course, I don't like seeing nothing going on in my neighborhood. I don't like seeing businesses shut down. I don't like seeing people lives ruined. I don't like any of it. I mean, who does? So where do we draw the line? When do we finally wake up as a people?
It comes down to critical thinking. Critical thinking breaks down logical sequencing, compare and contrast patterns of behavior. It's math. It goes back to God. It goes back to scripture. It goes back to God's laws.
So God does exist. What do you think God is doing with all of this? What is this? Tell us what's going on.
Well, okay. In order to get that, let's critically think that. If God is our Father and we are his children, and he set up everything in this life, every animal, every plant, with everything it needs to become exactly like its father, what does that tell you is the purpose of all of this? What is this father doing to his children? He is training us to handle things like he does.
Obedience.
Step up. Be like me. Be like God the Father. Be like his son, Jesus Christ. How do you do that? Well, you follow the scriptures. You have morals, which are laws. You follow his laws.
What does love mean to Resa Kirkland?
You love them. It
What
means
does that
that
mean?
if they come, there are laws. If they come to you and they're willing to live in peace and follow the law, you let them in.
Give us an example of where you've had to do that, where you've had to actually love an enemy.
I live in an area where my son and I have really been treated very badly. When this pandemic, sham-demic came out a couple of weeks ago, and they ended up canceling church and everything, I thought, well, neighbors are afraid. They may not understand patterns in history like I do. What can I do since I can't go to church because it's been shut down? Why not have my own church, is what I call it online. So I made up a bunch of cookies and a bunch of lemon pound cake. I took it by to them with a note with my phone number to text and said, if you need anything, you call me. We're all in this together. God says to help one another. Now, if Putin called me tomorrow and asked for help, I would try to figure out through logical sequencing, critical thinking, what help he needed and what he was doing. If there were those that sincerely needed help, then I would go to our church organization who has a system set up. They would send clothes, they would send food immediately, because that's what you do. But what they would not do is allow themselves to be used and manipulated, because the law says, be vigilant, be wise, for the wolf will try to enter in sheep's clothing. The fear going on right now, who started that? Where did it come from? And why?
There's no doubt at all that evil does exist in the universe. There's no doubt. You know, it is there.
You can't have one without the other, yeah.
Even the scriptures say that the prince of the planet, which is evil, will roam about seeking to devour whoever allows himself to be devoured. And
right.
And I think also, you know, we can use these scriptures too, that you have to be as wise as the serpent and as meek as the lamb. And I think there are opportunities everywhere, you know, but I do believe that we are in an ideological war. There's no doubt, which is man's invention. But underneath all of it, it's made all by the Creator to bring something into line. And I think what Bill's getting at, what we're talking about, is this love and compassion. And you can be loving and compassionate, doesn't mean that you have to be taken. Mm-hmm. You know, Job, I think, wrote there's going to be wars and rumors of wars.
Right.
Not yet. You know, so I believe that because fear is used as a weapon, not just by the evil spirit, but also by elements of those principalities, I think they're called, that we have to be wary and we have to be on guard. Doesn't mean that we don't have to distrust. We just have to have our dander up. You know,
right. We have to be wise, because remember, if we let the wolf in, what do you think God's going to say about that at the judgment bar? If we were foolish enough to let the wolf in and not heed the discernment that he gives us, warning, hey, don't trust that guy. Look at his pattern.
Then shame on us. But there's no doubt that America, in its inception in the Constitution and what those guys had in their heads with the Monroe Doctrine and all the writings from Jefferson and Adams and all these guys, there's no doubt that what the framers had in their mind was to give the people the ultimate freedom, which is free will. Mm-hmm. And the only way to do that is through a constitution, because obviously the European or the British Commonwealth, the Crown, was not going to listen to anything these radicals had to say. If America did not come into existence, let's just say it never happened, people on the planet would probably have never had the opportunity to enjoy the God-given rights that we've got now.
Joseph Smith in the Doctrine and Covenants wrote a scripture saying that God hath made you free, therefore you are free indeed. God hath given you agency, and the law also hath made thee free. God put you here to grow up, to test you, so that you could prove worthy of having him as a father.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of AHO Radio. Information we mentioned is probably in the show notes, but if we missed anything, please let us know and we'll get it added for you. Subscribe to the AHO Radio channel on YouTube to stay connected, and as always, we wish you health, success, and significance. AHO!